I'm going to condense this and hope it pulls together some of the things that have arisen today in the different papers that have cropped up, because I'm aware that we're running a bit late. So
don't worry. We've come to listen to you.
Thank you. Well, just to say then, I'd like to introduce Olivier Clément. I'm delighted to be speaking about him. And if the short paper that I'm going to give encourages you to read his books, that will be fantastic. He's a great thinker of the 20th century, and his life spanned 87 years, 1921 to 2009, of which almost 6 decades were committed to Christian thought and writing on French Orthodox, as a French Orthodox lay theologian. In Nicolas Lossky's view, he is probably the greatest French theologian of the 20th century. It's quite a statement. I'm delighted to give this paper, as I said, and also delighted that Olivier Clément really stands for ecumenism and unity within the Christian churches. He remained absolutely rooted in his own orthodox ecclesial tradition. Yet he sought dialogue and encounter with modern Catholic thought and other Christian traditions, particularly in the social and political context of Europe and the Middle East. He was a creative thinker with a deep knowledge of atheism, totalitarianism, orthodoxy, and Catholicism. He was able to hear the voice of the Greek Catholic Church as an expression of Christian unity between Orthodox and Catholic Christians. And that's an important point that has been picked up during the afternoon in the paradigm of the churches of Antioch. His theology is really a synthesis of Christian tradition and modernity, and he's a really important voice for Christian unity at this time, a time which, in spite of an adverse reception of Christianity by many people, he judges to be a kairos for the Church. He keeps Christ at the center of his life and thought, with a high awareness of pneumatology and a really vibrant expectation that the Holy Spirit is acting in the world, now, alive today. Central to his argument is his understanding of the meaning of life for the human person as a unique presence within a communion of persons that reflects the unity and diversity of the Trinity. From a position of unity and diversity, he believes the churches must provide a Christian direction to the new world that is being born. Born himself in a de-Christianized area of southern France, he grew up in a family that embraced atheist and socialist philosophies. Thus, he never really experienced any religious education or context in his earlier life. And he grew up as an atheist in a milieu where atheist nihilism had become a significant contemporary context within Europe and also for the Orthodox Church in Russia that he later embraced. Working in Paris as a teacher, Clément met the Russian émigré theologians and philosophers who had settled in Paris. He was particularly influenced by the thought of Nicholas Berdyaev, Vladimir Lossky, and Paul Evdokimov. As an atheist, he was astonished to read Vladimir Lossky's apophatic approach to Christian mystery, which nevertheless was able to speak of alterity and of God as personal and a communion of persons. Clément later appreciated profoundly that it was through his meeting with Christians, Christianity as represented by the Russian Orthodox tradition, that he himself experienced a decisive awakening of conscience. This new understanding and encounter with Christ led to Clément's baptism into the Russian Orthodox Church in the Francophone parish of the Patriarch of Moscow in Paris in 1951. The creative synthesis of patristic tradition with modern European thought and culture achieved by the theologians of the Russian Orthodox diaspora in Paris, also impacted significantly on French Catholic thought prior to the Second Vatican Council. Catholic thinkers like Henri de Lubac, Karl Rahner, Marie-Dominique Chenu, Yves Congar, Jean Danilou were amongst theologians who became involved in the ressourcement movement, which arose between 1930 and 1950, called Nouvelle Theology by its detractors because it sought renewal of neo-scholasticism and its influence on Catholic teaching. The contribution of these Russian Orthodox religious philosophers and theologians in France acted as a catalyst that contributed to the remarkable renewal of the Catholic Church in the 20th century and marked the beginning of a fruitful dialogical encounter between Eastern and Western Christianity. Olivier Clément's theology, as it matured over his remaining 57 years after becoming a Christian, became a living synthesis of Eastern and Western Christianity in his life. Jean-Claude Noyer describes it: intelligent, profound, interiorly renewed Christianity, important for our time. He published over 40 books and numerous articles on the history, theology, and the spirituality of Eastern Orthodoxy, ecumenism, and interreligious dialogue. Undoubtedly, when he entered the Russian Orthodox Church, he inherited some polemical ideas towards Catholicism. 19th century Orthodox attitudes towards the Roman Catholic Church were rooted in polemics against Catholic counter-Reformation missionary endeavours in the East, and also from the earlier medieval polemical discourse concretized in the supposed 5 dogmatic errors recorded by Photius in 867. One historian notes that when Russians at Kiev were baptized by Byzantine missionaries, they inherited an anti-Catholic perspective from Greek hierarchy and clergy who headed the new Kievan church. Over time, dogmatic polemical discourse degenerated into an assessment of Catholic culture that was fallacious, and Jeremy has spoken about that. However, in an interview for France Catholique in 2004, Clément reflects on his decision, above all, to give up the use of polemics. He recalls it was in 1968, Patriarch Athenagoras, the man of reconciliation and unity, who freed him from fear of the other and opened up a capacity to love that chooses to regard another Christian as a brother rather than be against him. This capacity, he believes, matured since meeting John Paul II, and when he met John Paul II in Paris, initially at the request of John Paul to meet some French intellectuals, it sparked a friendship which was later matured when Olivier lived in Rome himself at the Aletti Centre, which was a wonderful cultural centre that John Paul II had initiated to bring close ties between East and West. He would often be invited in for tea at the Vatican, and as he put it, they would talk together like a couple of old guys together, just tossing off ideas. It was really a lovely picture to see them in your mind's eye. But moving beyond polemics, we need today to reflect on a period of ecclesial life in which tensions were resolved, neither by the Pope nor against the councils, but in a different way, he says. As an Orthodox Christian, he sought a new paradigm for ecumenism through Eucharistic ecclesiology, an ecclesiology of communion and a synthesis of culture and Christian values. Clément's profound and sympathetic understanding of Western Catholic tradition and Western society, secular society and politics is a defining context for his emergence as an Eastern Orthodox thinker in dialogue with Western thought. His engagement and friendships with eminent religious leaders of the 20th century on contemporary spiritual, ecclesial and cultural problems have included dialogues with the Patriarch Athenagoras, as I said, Pope John Paul II again, Patriarch Bartholomew I, Ignatius IV Hasim of Antioch and all the East, Andrea Riccardi of Sant'Edigio, and Dumitru Stanilo and Brother Roger of Thésée, to name just a few. He seemed to be able to really form friendships and build a bond between East and West through these encounters. Clément's book, Rome Autrement, an orthodox reflection on the papal primacy, written in 1997, came in response to John Paul II's request for ecumenical discussion with regard to the ministry of the Petrine office. It situates Clément ecclesially in the Orthodox tradition and ecumenically and dialogically with Catholicism. It explores ways in which the Orthodox can help the process of ecumenical reinterpretation of primacy in the universal church, and the possibility that there is a place in Orthodox ecclesiology for a position of universal leadership. He notes that for Christians of the first centuries, the church was above all the body of Christ, that there was no ecclesiology per se, and affirms it is the Eucharist that makes the church the body of Christ. In Clément's view, it is important to remember the mystery recognized by the East from the 5th century of the presence of Peter and Paul in Rome, and the presidency of love vested on the Church of Rome. Clément finds it important to recall the special role of Peter as protos, the first, not arche, validated in the New Testament, that is, the original. He recalls Serge Bulgakov's appraisal that the separation of Orthodox and Catholic Christians does not mean the radical formation of two churches. Rather, it is a crack in the single trunk which continue to bring fruits of holiness to both sides. If history is accelerated in the West, the archaism of the Eastern Christian tenaciously brings witness to the arche, the original. Clément adds that Vatican II recognized that the Petrine ministry could only function within the grace sustaining the episcopacy, for there is no sacrament of papacy. However, he points that from the earliest years of the Church, a greater priority of reception was accorded to the Church of Rome. Clément notes a prophetic event which occurred a month after the publication of Ut Unum Sunt, and I think it's been referred to earlier today, it was, when the Synod of the Greek Catholic Church took place in Lebanon. Nearly all bishops present signed a profession of faith that expressed, firstly, I believe everything that the Orthodox Church teaches. Secondly, I am in communion with the Bishop of Rome in the role that the Eastern Fathers accorded him before the separation. The text was approved by Metropolitan Georges Cadre of the Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch, with the agreement of the Patriarch Ignatius IV Hasim. The Metropolitan declared, I consider this profession of faith to set the necessary and sufficient conditions for re-establishing the unity of the Orthodox churches with Rome. Debates about the Church as an institution, Clément considers, fail to see the real state of ecclesial being as the experience of a person in communion, for whom humanity and the cosmos are by nature resurrectional and paschal. The supreme model of the Church, in view of John Paul II, is the divine Trinity as a communion personorum. Unity of the Church for Clément was a Trinitarian obligation. He evokes the Orthodox Canon 34, saying it is fitting that bishops should know who among them is first, and that they acknowledge him as head, and that they do nothing outside their own churches without having consulted him. But neither should the one who was first do anything without deliberating with all the others. In this way, there will be unity of thought, and God the Father will be glorified through the Lord in the Holy Spirit. It's Canon 34. It is therefore Clément's judgment that in no way is it essential for the exercise of primacy that the Bishop of Rome should appoint the bishops of the entire world, nor that his administrative headquarters should be a sovereign territory, nor that he should be head of a state among all the powerful. He points to the papacy of the first 8 centuries, who without such a state bore witness to the independence of the Church, through martyrdom if necessary. Clément believes it is possible to conceive of a church restructured around dynamic Eucharistic communities, each gathered round its bishop, yet linked to centres of unison and of communion, with universal primacy ultimately pertaining to the Bishop of Rome, as the embodiment of both the present of Peter and the charismatic inspiration of Paul. In the first millennium, Rome did not claim jurisdiction over the other churches. She possessed authority, not power. The praetorian role was to keep watch over the local churches to prevent them from breaking away, to intervene if requested, to serve as a point of reference. Clément cites John Paul II's declaration, "What I seek with the Orthodox is communion, not jurisdiction." Clément's judgment is that the one essential change required in the exercise of papal primacy would be to pass from a situation where the hierarchical dovetailing of power structures has legal backup to one where tensions are held in balance without predetermined juridical solutions. A fruitful step forward would be to proceed to a common reflection, as John Paul II requested at the end of Utunum Sint, on decisions made during the centuries of division. I'd just like to touch on the situation in Antioch briefly. We have mentioned it already, but it's very important to Olivier Clément, who truly loved those Eastern churches. And he realized how important they were for the West. The 5 ancient patriarchs that accepted the decision of the Council of Chalcedon in 451 included the Patriarchate of Antioch, which survived, as we know, over 1,400 years in a homeland dominated by Islamic culture and power. Damascus has been the seat of the 5 patriarchates, 3 of which are autonomous Eastern Catholic churches in full communion with Rome, and also the Orthodox Church of Antioch and all the East and Antioch. So we're very grateful to Anthony for having enumerated those earlier. These patriarchs recognize each other as holding authentic patriarchates that share a common heritage. An Antiochian paradigm evolved of dialogue and unity, a dialogue of peace, an ecumenical movement. The ecumenical witness of the Melkite Greek Catholic Church with the Orthodox Church in Antioch could be a paradigm for Christian unity in Europe, particularly Eastern Europe and the Ukraine, where the Ukrainian Catholic Church came into existence at the Union of Brest in 1596. Robert Taft judges that Eastern Catholic theology derives richness from both Western and Catholic Orthodox theology, but is a cultural reality in itself. It is a theology that seeks to breathe with the 2 lungs that we heard about earlier, bringing oxygen from both sides of the East-West divide. The churches of Antioch have shown that diversity and plurality are not a barrier to unity. The ecumenical mission of the Eastern Catholic churches today, as it was at their inception, is to witness to the true universality of the Church both Catholic and Eastern. Clément believed that the phenomenon of globalization requires Christians to join together as leaven in the history of the world. Clément, in 2003, judged that Taizé and similar groups that bring Christians of different denominations together in prayer help to remove misconceptions that impede us from truly seeing other Christians as brothers and sisters in Christ. He identifies this as resulting from a historical wound that orthodoxy must overcome. The tension in relations between Moscow and Rome, and Moscow and Constantinople, are stumbling blocks to unity. Clément predicted that the division of the Orthodox in Ukraine will result in an autocephalous church in Ukraine that could in future be realigned with the Patriarchate of Constantinople. He judges Taizé as a parable of key importance because it takes us beyond national and historical limitations. It expresses not only Clément's search for a meaning to life, but also the uneasy search of our whole society and Western culture. Clément believed that in spite of the spiritual collapse affecting Europe and the West, there remains a fire at the core of things. At the very center of history, there is not nothingness, but love itself. The monastic expression of Taizé evolved organically and in an unpremeditated way, as Clément put it, as leaven worked through the dough of history. Importantly, its genesis flows from the same ecumenical unity experienced in the gulags by Solzhenitsyn and World War II prison camps, born of mutual service, hope, love, and prayer. Taizé is a parable of the Church being brought together in diversity, the discovery of unity, and the undivided Church as an experience of Pentecost. Here the monks combine diversity of Christian background with diversity of languages, rare in modern Europe, giving a sense of being the one Church. In the words of Saint Evagrius of Pontus, monks are separate from all and united to all. In this way, they reveal that unity is not something to be built, but to be discovered. Three great monastic themes of Taizé are reconciliation between Christians, evangelization aimed specifically at young people, and a Christianity that is creative. Clément judges the re-emergence of the undivided Church to be the crucial phenomenon of our time. Nicholas Losky remarked that he had never met anyone more French than Olivier. I take this to mean Clément's love of France and Europe and his allegiance to the values of liberty, equality, and fraternity that he believes should be implicit in laïcité. With modern European society in mind, Clément observes that freedom today is disquieted and self-questioning. Our first task is to commit ourselves to its inner movement in order to humbly give it meaning, which will liberate it from emptiness, by giving science and technology a direction, by deepening our common solidarity. Rowan Williams noted in 1997 that orthodoxy in France is overwhelmingly francophone, and its leading constructive theologian, Olivier Clément, has succeeded in constructing an orthodox theology very deeply engaged with the mainstream of Western European culture, that confronts European intellectual life on scientific, political, and philosophical arenas from a perspective formed but not restricted by the Greek patristic vision. Concerning European identity in a post-ideological era, the term laïcité was coined in the 1870s to bring the French ideal of freedom of conscience and freedom to practice the religion of choice. Today, laïcité has become a contested space, characterized by the Janus face of positive and negative secularism. While positive laicite could create a space for dialogue, tolerance and plurality, negative laicite inclines towards state control that could lead to the totalitizing tendencies of militant secular regimes that result in the violation of human rights of religious minorities and groups, as experienced in the past in Turkey and the Soviet Union. Brian T. Taylor suggests that the secular is truly itself when it is oriented to the sacred. In a paradigm of dialogical alterity, Jürgen Habermas and the future Pope Benedict XVI co-authored a book on the dialectics of secularization, in which believer and non-believer reject the notion of a neutral secular state, which judges itself above all religions and cultural differences, but advocates the West recognize and embrace the complementarity of the sacred and the secular in a sacred, secular dialectic of truth. Rowan Williams notes that Clément perceived the dialectical necessity of European atheism as a step to recovering the vision of a living God. Clément views secularism as the daughter of Christianity, a dialogical space in which the atheist, the agnostic, or the non-believer is at home in his or her search for truth. Secularism can provide a space in which diversity is accepted and different religions are accommodated. He recognized an ironic and dialogical respect for the other was essential in ecumenical endeavor and interreligious or cultural encounter. Antoine Arjakovsky, French Orthodox historian and intellectual with profound knowledge of Russian ecclesiology and politics and the Greek Catholic and Orthodox churches in Ukraine, recognizes Clément as a master for the Church of the 21st century. He demonstrates that Orthodox theology is not static and goes beyond the Orthodox historical self-consciousness of a given era and even beyond the boundaries of the Orthodox Church. Clément took forward the baton held out by the theologians and thinkers of the Russian Paris School to make the West more aware of the riches of the Christian East. Arjakovsky has taken the baton and synthesis of the Paris School and Clément's thought to creatively bring it forward into the religious, public and political domain of East and West in the 21st century. Clément has thus gained recognition, I think, as a contemporary church father between East and West. I'm condensing things here, but I'd just like to slot in here that Olivier Clément, when he's talking about the mystery of personhood, for him the person is an absolutely unique presence, unique in that it reflects the living God, an image of unity and alterity. Clément's thought on the person as an image of alterity and not identity thus has deep significance for the choices made in the 21st century. He has truly assisted through his writings and through his presence and thought. He has assisted the move away from privileged individualism to a recognition of the sacrament of our brother. So I'd love to talk more about Clément, but I'm just going to give a very brief word about the Eastern Catholic movement in Russia, and just to try and slot it in with the great stuff that we've heard from Jeremy already. So I'd just like to look at that trajectory. The movement in Russia, the Eastern Catholic movement in Russia, and Vladimir Soloviev come together immediately, recognized by some, Soloviev recognized by some as John Henry Newman of Russia, whose thought Olivier Clément admired very much. Just to say that Soloviev, I understand, was received into communion with the Holy See as a Russian Byzantine Catholic in 1896 by a Father Nicholas Tolstoy, who had himself sought communion with Rome 3 years earlier and became the first Russian Byzantine Catholic priest in 1893. And it's interesting that he was incardinated in the Melkite Catholic Church. The Russian Byzantine Catholic Church traces its institutional origin then back to the second half of the 19th century in Russia, where the philosophy of Vladimir Soloviev had fostered an active debate and interest concerning the universality of the Church and Church unity. Between 1900 and 1914, a renaissance was actually stirring within the Russian Orthodox Church itself that drew many Russian intellectuals towards Christianity, but only a minority of these became Catholics. But from this nucleus, the Russian Catholic Exarchate was established. The Exarchate arose out of a spontaneous movement from within Russia and from within the Orthodox Church itself. This small group of intellectuals, Orthodox priests and those wealthy enough to have travelled abroad in Europe, saw what they understood to be a reduced state of the Orthodox Church, but they chose not to leave their Russian religious heritage for Latin Catholicism. 20th century Russian Eastern Catholics believed that they were called to witness to unity in a particular way. And I find that very fascinating. And they did that through celebrating the liturgy in the Orthodox tradition while being in communion with Rome. Of course, to many of the Orthodox, the Russian Catholics looked like agents of the Pope. And even though the initiative had actually arisen from within the Orthodox Church, the problem was made worse in Rome by the prevailing thought there perhaps was that Russian Catholic, to become the work with Russian Catholics was a preliminary step to turning Russians into Latin Catholics. And it said that some even saw communist persecution as a providential opportunity. Michel d'Herbigny, the French Jesuit advisor of Pius X in Russia, was mistaken in anticipating a wave of Russian conversion to Catholicism following Soloviev's teaching, and underestimated the animosity of the Russian authorities towards the Roman Church. For example, 2 Jesuit bishops sent by d'Herbigny to establish a seminary in Odessa in 1926 were immediately arrested. Just to talk about briefly the Eastern Greek Catholics in the Soviet bloc, there was, as we know, a martyrdom of Greek Catholic churches took place from the end of the Second World War until 1989. And by 1945, the entire Greek Catholic hierarchy had been imprisoned and the Union of Brest abolished, and forced reunion with the Orthodox Church began in Western Ukraine and spread Romania, Slovakia. Amid suffering and persecution, the underground Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church re-emerged in 1989 when most members of the Russian Orthodox Church in Western Ukraine re-entered the Catholic Church. Perestroika and the fall of communism in '89 brought certain freedoms for religious organizations registered by the state. Legally, all religious associations are separated from the state and equal before the law. Consequently, the Catholic Church was able to found new congregations in Russia. Since 1970, a small number of educated Christians have become Catholics. Most of these wish to follow the Latin rite, but a minority hope the Exarchate for Catholics of the Byzantine Rite, established in 1917, will be revived, arguing that although it was suppressed, it was never abolished by the Holy See itself and has never ceased to function de jure. They have a remarkable bishop, Joseph Wirth, in Siberia, and he was appointed as administrator not only of the Latin Rite but of the Byzantine Rite Christians. When he arrived, there were only 3 priests there to serve Catholics scattered over a vast region of 4.2 million square miles. I can hardly think of it. He had himself clandestinely become a priest, studying in Lithuania, and became a Jesuit in 1984, and was the first Catholic priest ordained since the 1930s in the former Soviet Union. So a small number of Russians who converted to Latin Rite Catholicism during the 19th century, and the change of legislation in Russia in 1905 opened a sort of space for the genesis of Russian Eastern Catholic movement. The Eastern Catholic instinct is an indigenous part of the religious renaissance that arose among Russian thinkers at the end of the 19th century concerning Christian religious philosophy, ecclesiology, and Christian unity. Russian Eastern Catholics felt drawn to express a new unity of Christianity by their presence in Russia, as Catholics who celebrated the liturgy in the tradition of orthodoxy while confessing communion with Rome. Anti-Roman feeling, rooted in Russian political and ecclesial history, led to the destruction of the Eastern Catholic churches under the Soviet bloc. Yet, this ecclesial presence rose again at the fall of communism in 1989. Today, there is no promotion by the Vatican of the Catholic Byzantine Rite in Russia, where only a remnant of the former Eastern Catholic expression remains, and this without support of priests. It's worth noting in this sort of contemporary context that Vladimir Putin has aligned himself with the Orthodox Church as an institution, an alliance of church and state, which has proven dangerous for the Church in the past, whether with Caesar or the Tsar. There were some very saintly members among the Russian Catholics, notably Leonid Fyodorov. He was the first exarch of the Russian Catholics and was incarcerated in Solovki prison camp, where he continued to celebrate the Divine Liturgy. He was beatified by Pope John Paul II in 2001. But as we know, the majority of Russian Catholics live in the diaspora in the United States, Argentina, Australia, and France. And it has to be said that their clergy feel neglected, for no new exarch has been appointed. In Russia, they have been put uncomfortably, it seems, under the Catholic Apostolic Administrator, Joseph Wirth, as I mentioned. I think I'd like to just draw things to a close, just simply stating that according to most recent figures, there are approximately 773 Catholics in Russia, which is about 0.5% of the total population. And just to bring things together to a close, I'd just like to go back to Robin's talk this morning, that, you know, he made some very important points, and I thought there was a real note of urgency in what he was saying and feeling, which I'd like to respond to. He drew our attention to important aspects concerning the Eastern churches that were very close to Olivier Clément's heart. Robin asked, why is so little known in the West about the Eastern churches? And this was certainly a a situation that Olivier Clément attempted to rectify by raising awareness, and especially raising awareness of the importance of the wonderful heritage of Eastern spirituality for Western Christianity in Europe. And another point that Robin made was to speak about tradition is not to call to speak about tradition within the church is not a call to live in the past or promote nationalism. Our job is to hand it on creatively with openness to the other. Robin also mentioned you cannot be ecumenical unless you are deeply rooted in your own tradition, and that was most certainly true of Olivier Clément. And fourthly, how do we raise awareness? How can the voice of the minority Eastern churches be heard today? And he answered it by saying prophetic characters emerge and become the voice of their own people and era, and on into the future. The Eastern churches have brought forth some amazing prophetic voices, prophets who put their trust in the Lord of the harvest. There are many Eastern Christians who could be named in this respect, but certainly Olivier Clément is one of them. And just give a little example of how things do get carried on into the future. Just a couple of years ago now, Pope Francis was addressing 1,000 Catholic priests in Rome, come together for a retreat, when he said, if you want to know about Eastern Christianity, read Olivier Clément. Thank you.